Mixing in Ableton Live can be one of the more frustrating parts of the program, at least in my opinion. And generally it's used less because a lot of people are using it for production. In this video, we're gonna go from beat to final product. What's up? I'm Drew. Welcome back to the channel. This is video number 3 in a 3-part series we're doing on using Ableton Live for music production. In the first video, we talked about setting up Ableton Live for you, getting your audio ran, getting folder management set up. And in the second video, we actually made music in Ableton Live using different plugins, using guitars, using basses, using a beat pad, and a MIDI controller keyboard. In today's video, we're gonna take a beat that we made in part 2 of this series, and we're gonna turn it into a finished product. We're gonna go over things like EQ, compression, saturation and distortion, automation, reverb, delay, and even get into my master bus chain to bring it to a finished product. Let's get right into it. First thing we're gonna look at is EQ. A place where you commonly use EQ are on cymbals. So I'm gonna go to this ride cymbal that we have, solo it out, and I'm gonna use just the stock Ableton EQ so you can see what that looks like. And the stock Ableton EQ is honestly really, really great. Gives you good visual feedback. I'm gonna start by just listening. And I'm hearing like a little metallic-y sound. I'm gonna go filter sweep and try to find the general area of where this annoying sound is. Something there. But that's the one I'm kind of hearing. Then we're gonna hone in on that area, right? So we're gonna make the cue a little tighter. We're gonna keep listening. There's that weird annoying sound. So I'm gonna bring the gain down. And I'm actually gonna tighten the cue up a little bit more. You can also hit this little arrow and it'll make it even bigger up here on the bottom of your screen, which is super helpful for trying to find different things. I'm gonna just kind of go through and pick a couple different areas where there's some annoying stuff. All right. And then I think there's one more high one that I want to get. So I'm going to add a band. And this is pretty easy, especially when you can see it. I'm going to go down here. I'm going to go to this 5 and I'm going to check this box. And that's going to activate a 5th band for me. And I'm going to use this 5th band to go find something in the top. Oh, that's really annoying. That little ear-piercing sound is kind of what I'm hearing. I'm going to tighten in on that. And I'm going to bring that gain down. Tighten that EQ up a little bit more. Actually going to broaden that out. Smooth out that top area a lot. That's a basic way to use your stock EQ to EQ some cymbals. You can use that exact same approach across basically every single instrument. Go find all of the gross and annoying sounding stuff or things that just don't fit in the mix and cut those things out. Another way to use EQ is additive. What we did with the stock EQ was we did more of a removing of things. With an additive EQ, we want to do more of an enhancing of things. So let's find a way to do that. Let's go to this lead piano track. I'm gonna grab another plugin. I'm gonna grab this SSL EQ, and I'm also going to grab one of my other favorite EQs, the FabFilter Pro Q3. And I'm gonna put that in front of the SSL EQ. So with Pro Q3, I'm gonna bring that up, I'm gonna listen, I'm gonna cut out some sections of this piano that I don't find very pleasing. All right, so I'm using this high pass EQ to cut out the lows. There's a lot of rumbliness down there, as you can see on the EQ. All this stuff down here. All this stuff down here. I'm just using this EQ to cut all that out. And then I just found a couple areas that I thought were kind of annoying, like that area, that kind of area, that area. They're either too boxy or kind of honky sounding, not very clear, kind of making the piano a little bit muffly in the mix as a whole. And then I want to go to this SSL EQ. I'm going to take this and I'm going to boost things to kind of add some enhancement. So I'm going to show you what that sounds like. So I boosted a little bit up here to add a little bit of extra air, especially when it hits that highest note. I want that note to really ring out, but not in an annoying way, in a pleasing way. And I want it to feel like you're in the room with it and that note is just lingering. And then also I gave it a little bit more body down here in the low mid area. And I also took out, as you can see, I cut a little bit more in the high mid area around 4K-ish. I boosted a little bit in like the 800 range. Let's check this area. Yeah, so I ended up cutting some there too. So I'm kind of doing a wider boost after finding some problem areas. So the way I'm approaching this is I'm using the Pro Q to find the problem areas and cut out different things that just really annoy me. And I'm using the SSL EQ to do more broader boosts of things that I find pleasing in the actual sound. So like the top end or like the low mid area. I do like some of that area and I'm trying to bring some of that back in using the SSL EQ. So this is before any EQ. With the Pro Q. And then without again. Kind of just lifts it up already. And then even more, this is without the SSL EQ. And then we're gonna add that EQ back in. Which I find all of that pretty cool. This might be a little much on the top end. But I do like that. And then in context. Awesome. So now we're going to move on to compression. A couple ways to use compression is to control a sound's high and lows and kind of balance it out a little bit more. And there's also a technique called sidechain compression we're going to talk about. Firstly, I'm going to use compression to control some of the hits on my snare. I'm actually going to group these snares together so that I can make the compression changes to both snares at the same time. So I'm gonna grab the stock Ableton glue compressor that I actually find works really, really well. And all I wanna do is for that attack on that snare to just be a little less aggressive. So I'm gonna bring the attack all the way down so that it's reading that attack faster The attack shows how quick the compressor is acting on the sound source. So, and then as you can see, if I made it slower, there's a little bit more of a delay when that compressor kicks in. Whereas when it's faster, it's immediate. As soon as it gets that sound, it's compressing. Then I don't want the compressor to stay there. I don't want that volume to be turned down that long because I want that tail of the reverb and I want the tail of the actual snare to come through still. So I'm gonna turn our release time down so that it's also a little faster so that when the snare hits, it's catching that initial attack, turning that part down, and then as soon as that part's over, it's turning the rest of the snare sound back up so that we are effectively controlling the peak and the bottom together. So let's start at a really quick release. That's pretty cool. Let's go with a slightly slower one. And I think I like that 0.4 release on that snare. It feels a little more natural to me. Glue compressor, the compressor that we're using, comes with Ableton as a stock plugin, and it is a fantastic compressor, in my opinion. I use it on a ton of different stuff, especially when I'm making beats in Ableton and trying to do a quicker mix. It's very low CPU. I actually think, yeah, it's literally introducing 0 latency, whereas some other plugins would cause a little bit more latency and would start wearing on your CPU a little bit more. So now that we've done that, I'm going to show you a little bit about sidechain compression. I'm going to show you a really basic way. So I want my melody piano here. I wanted to have that ducking sound, like it's just backing off a lot. So on this track, I'm going to add, and I'm going to use a couple different things to do this. First, I'm going to use the glue compressor that I was using before. I'm going to drop it on the piano section. I'm going to open this little tab to the left of where it says glue compressor. It's going to give me some sidechain options. I'm going to hit sidechain. I'm going to tell it to input from the kick. And now, instead of like in the snare where I put the glue compressor on the snare channel, so it was reading the audio from the snare channel, now on the piano channel, I have the same compressor, but instead of reading the audio from the piano channel, I'm having it read the audio from the kick channel so that the piano audio will react to when the kick hits. I want to actually do a fast attack on this so that it starts exactly when the kick hits. I want to do a high ratio because I want the amount that it turns down to be a lot so that I can control it with the threshold. And then I'm going to use the release and the threshold to get the timing right on how I want it to sound. And what that will do is that will get the piano out of the way so that the kick can be a little bit more present. Now, another way we can do this, and this is my preferred way to do this, is using a plugin called Kickstart. And they just updated to Kickstart 2. It looks like this. And it will actually sync to your project and then give you the side chain ducking sound without having to sync it to your kick if you want it that way. Gives you a good mix knob so you can control the amount. It also lets you change the envelope type. It also lets you drag that envelope left and right for just more customization with your sound. And then this area over here where it says band will let you pick a specific area for it to sidechain to. Now, that is one way I like to use it, especially when you're making more house music or you maybe want to have that pumping kind of sound without a kick. I like to go to audio. I'm going to go back to the default setting. I like to hit the audio section here. And then down here on the plugin area where it says sidechain, I'm going to select the kick. We're going to do a similar thing with kickstart that we did with the glue compressor. So now you can hear that instead of just syncing to the project and doing it on every quarter note, it's actually reading the audio from the kick channel and applying that to kickstart, which I find to be a little bit better. You have a little more control over everything than just using a compressor. And I find it just sounds a little cleaner, in my opinion. Another really great place to do that is actually in the bass, because the bass and the kick relationship is actually extremely important because they're both low end and they're both coming straight up the middle. You're not really going to pan either of them normally. I'm just going to copy this kickstart plugin off the piano and put it on the bass. We're going to use side chaining here to actually get the bass to move out of the way of the kick a little bit, so that there's constant low end, but they're not really fighting over the same frequency area. So now that's a lot more even. We're using sidechain to almost even out our low end with the kick and the bass relationship and almost marry them into one instrument rather than having a separate kick and bass. The kick is now the attack of the bass, and the bass is now the extension of the note of the kick. The next thing we're going to talk about is using distortion. Now, a lot of people know this from maybe like guitar playing is pretty common, bass playing, using distortion on organs, sometimes on vocals. You can get really, really creative. An interesting way to use distortion is to actually use it as effectively an EQ or maybe a compressor, depending on how you use it. We're actually going to use it to tame some hi-hats. Sometimes you would just throw an EQ on the hi-hat channel and then EQ out the areas that might be really annoying. Instead, the way I'm going to go about it is I'm going to use distortion to tame some of that high end with distortion and give that hi-hat a really cool sound. So we're going to hop over to our hi-hat channel, and I'm going to use a free plugin from Cymatics called Diablo Lite. I'm using this because it's free and everybody can have access to it. So as you can see, the punch side of that gave it a little bit more oomph to our hot notes. Let's see what the clip side does. Cool, and then let's turn it to soft clip and see what that does. So I'm going to use a little bit of both of those. I'm going to bring the mix back because I don't want it to be 100% distorted. I actually want to blend the two together, the non-distorted signal and the distorted signal, to marry them together. It really solidifies that downbeat. So now if I unsolo it, kind of smoothed out some of that top end. It kind of smoothed it out in a pleasing way that got rid of some of that harsh high end without darkening it completely. So that's one way to use it. We're actually going to use distortion on our master chain bus a little later when we get to that. The next thing we're going to talk about is reverb. We used reverb when we were making our beat. In places like the snare, we used the Valhalla Vintage Verb to give that snare some space. We also used it in the guitar after our guitar amp plugin to also give it a little more length and a little more space. I'm just going to show you a little bit of before and after of why I did that on the guitar specifically. So this is the guitar without any reverb, just going through the amp sim, which has a little bit of reverb on it, but it's more of just like a space reverb. It's not really giving it any length. So this is that guitar soloed. So you kind of get the idea. It's pretty dry. There's no length to it. I'm going to add this Valhalla Vintage back in, and you're going to see that it's going to kind of get wider and also sit a little further back in the mix. So in mix context, here's no reverb. Feels a little out of place. Here's with the reverb. A good way to think about reverb usage, it can be used as an enhancer, the way that we're using it now. It can also be used as a mixing tool. Think about it this way: the less reverb you have, the more in your face it is. And actually, whenever you actually use a lot of reverb on a signal, it's actually going to push it further back into the mix. It's almost settling it in. It makes it seem further away. Think about when you're in like a hallway and you have someone directly in front of you, you can kind of hear like the space that they're in, but they're pretty right in front of you. Whereas if they're talking in a really far away hallway, they're going to sound like they're in a really far away hallway, and they're going to sound way further away from you. It's tricking your ear into hearing the source further away using reverb. We're actually going to add a little bit of delay as well to this. So I'm going to use the echo delay, which is a stock Ableton delay, and I'm actually going to put it in front of the verb, so between the amp and the verb. And there's a reason for that. And I'm going to dial in this delay on this guitar first. So I'm going to back down the dry wet meaning original signal versus affected signal. I'm going to bring it back a little more towards the dry or the original signal side of things. I don't really want it to be a dotted eighth pattern, so I'm going to go to just notes. And I actually want it to be a quarter note pattern. I want the repeats, instead of being da 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 da, I want them to be da da da. Awesome. I'm going to bring that signal down a little bit more. Cool. And now I'm going to add the reverb back in. And what that's going to do is that's going to affect both the original signal and the delayed signal in the reverb. So what we get now is reverb on our delay signal, and that's going to extend our guitar notes even more. We get like this really nice spacey guitar for this section. And in the mix, you can even hear it because the guitar feels like it's so much longer than it was the way I originally played it. And the notes almost seem to overlap, which is really nice because I want each guitar lick to feel like it's being completed all the way into the next one. So we have da 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 da, and I want that note to reach all the way to da 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 da. And the reverb and the delay are pushing it all the way through the next section. The next thing we're going to talk about is automation, and that's going to be done in two different ways. We're going to use some plugins that kind of do it for us, and then we're going to also write in automation for different reasons, whether that's volume automation or we're going to use it to change panning on certain things here and there. So we're going to start with the hi-hat. This is a really normal use of this kind of thing. I'm going to go to the audio effects area. I'm going to go to the pitch and modulation folder. I'm going to go to auto pan. I'm going to put that on my hi-hat channel. And what this is going to do is that this is going to automatically pan it at a rate that I set in different areas. There's also a plugin called Pan Man by Soundtoys that also does this. If you don't have Ableton, that is a really good option for this. Here's what it does. I'm gonna solo the hi-hat and I'm gonna turn the amount up. And you can hear it moving side to side. Now, what can make this really cool is it kind of gives your song some motion rather than it being just so stale right up the center. Auto pan makes it feel like it's moving, which it literally is, but it makes it feel like the song is moving. So in context of the music, kind of give it some motion. That's a little bit of an extreme example right there. So I'm going to dial this in a little bit to make it feel a little more natural. So I don't have it going as extreme. I have it kind of quarter panning them naturally, almost on beat, but a little off beat so that it's kind of catching it and moving it towards center every time a hi-hat hits. Which is really cool because in context, it does give it a good bit of movement. That's really cool. So another way we can use automation is volume automation. I'm gonna actually automate down this Labs piano doing the arpeggio, our lead piano. I like that loud here. But I think when the guitar comes in, I kind of want to highlight the guitar a little bit more. So I'm going to bring the volume down on the piano. So the way I'm going to do that in Ableton, I'm going to hit A. That's going to bring up our automation lanes. I'm going to select the volume. You can also do it here in the selection area, mixer, track volume. So I'm going to use these red lines. I'm going to bring it down. See, it's at negative 10.3. Let's bring it down about 2 dB. See how that sounds. So I ended up bringing it down about 6 dB. That way you can still hear it, but it doesn't get in the way of the guitar. It doesn't feel like the guitar and the piano are fighting it all. And you can see it changing on the actual volume meter here. So there we go. That's some ways to use automation or using plugins that do automation type things for you. And finally, I'm going to show you my master chain. So this is what we've been listening through this whole time. I actually like to mix into this. I'm going to take it all off. Here's what it sounds like without my master chain. A little bit quieter, a little less compressed, a lot less finished feeling. So I'm gonna bring, first thing is my Pro Q. This is if you want to screenshot this or anything like that, I'll go through each little bit. There's that cut, this dip, this boost at 80, this dip at 195, another wide dip at 177, and another lift at the end at 175 with a tight roll off at 22K. And where I got all these is actually from my friend Lee, who this is an EQ that's based off of one of his pieces of outboard gear that I really like and that he uses a lot for mixing. He made me a preset, and he used Pro Q to capture the EQ of that box and then sent me a preset of what it's doing. So that's where I kind of got all these. I'm not just getting them from nowhere or just doing whatever. This is like a preset thing that I use to get started. And then I kind of tweak it based on what I need. The next thing is thermal, which, like I said earlier, I was using saturation on my master bus. This is a saturation plugin. Looks very, very cool. I really like the way it looks. I'm just, as you can see, I'm just barely using a little bit of it. I'm set to about 11% distortion. So I'll actually show you what it sounds like 100% first. Then I'm gonna back it down. And the reason that I'm doing that is I'm actually only distorting from 250 hertz up. So I'm not really getting the low end or the low lows. I'm really just getting the mid range and the top end. And what that's doing is it's actually bringing out a little bit more of the top end, especially when it comes to like guitars or songs with vocals in it. I've used this a lot with songs with vocals in it. It tends to bring out the vocal a little more forward or the lead line a little more forward. I'll show you an A/B test real quick with this guitar line. So here it is without thermal. And then with thermal. Without thermal again. With thermal. Also, it kind of evens it out a little bit. It's almost doing a little bit of compression. The saturation is kind of bringing up some of the lower volume stuff and then also taming some of the guitar and some of the other high-end elements and kind of sandwiching them down into each other in a really cool way. So, and using saturation on your master bus is a really common use. I just think it's really cool that this plugin gives me so much control that I can do it in such a specific way. I'm just using the default setting. I've just tweaked the dry wet, the amount of distortion, and where it's distorting. And the last thing is a recent plugin called the God Particle. It's made by Jason Joshua, and it is his new mastering suite plugin kind of built into an all-in-one mastering plugin. So it's got a little bit of an EQ, a compressor that actually goes up to 200%. It does some interesting harmonic stuff as well. And then it's got a multi-band compressor here, and then a limiter finally on the end. If you want a full breakdown of this, one of my friends actually did a full deep dive on this plugin specifically. His name's Nick De Lorenzo, Aussie boy, really great mastering engineer and mixing engineer. I'll link to his video below, but if you're interested in that. But this plugin is I would say very unique and does some really cool stuff and just really worked on specifically this project. So this is without the limiter. I'm gonna turn it off. That's what it sounds like. Bass. I'm gonna turn it on. Turn the limiter back on. And now that I have this on, I'm gonna rebalance everything to kind of fit into where that plugin is taking it. So that's all for this video. I hope you guys learned some stuff. I tried to use both a mixture of stock plugins and paid plugins. So depending on what you have, you can kind of go about it different ways. And you can use different plugins that I use to get the exact same results. This is just kind of what I tend to use and what I'm kind of comfortable with using. So find what's best for you and just use that. It doesn't matter if it's stock or if it's paid. Use what you need to get going, and don't worry about having to spend a bunch of money on a bunch of plugins. Thanks again for checking out this video. If you want to see how we made this beat from scratch, check out part 2 of this series where we did exactly that. And if you're looking for some cool, chill, lo-fi music, I have a playlist of YouTube videos right over here for you to check out. Once again, I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you in the next one.